John Lennon, born October the 9th, 1940 in Liverpool, died December the 8th, 1980 in New York.
And all he was saying was, give peace a chance. On the afternoon of December the 6th, 1980, at about 5:45, we arrived at the Hit Factory recording studios situated on West 48th Street in New York. This was the studio where John and Yoko Lennon had recorded their album Double Fantasy. The previous day, Yoko had told me in a meeting that we'd had that John was just a little apprehensive about the prospect of his first radio interview in over 5 years. But when I arrived at the studio and finally shook his hand, my apprehension completely disappeared. He was warm, charming, very polite, and seemed absolutely delighted to see us. Before we actually started the tapes rolling, John and I began to get quite engrossed in a conversation about his early recordings at the BBC. He seemed to enjoy remembering the names and the people who'd been involved in those early recording sessions. So, having done that, and having felt that the atmosphere was completely right to start recording, on went the red light. John and Yoko Lennon were both in exceptionally good form. We set the tapes in motion.
We come along on Saturday morning, greeting everybody with a smile.
John and Yoko, it is more than wonderful to be able to talk to you after a very, very long time. We've been reminiscing just before the tape started rolling.
Right.
And John, you've been talking about Saturday Club, so the memory is still working.
Oh, the memory is very, very good. It gets better when you get older, actually. It gets more clear.
You remember those glorious
Bernie
days?
Andrews, and I was just saying, I heard some of the tracks. Somebody must have pirated them, Bernie, in America, you know. I've heard Saturday Club. We did a lot of tracks that were never recorded on record for Saturday Club. A lot of stuff we'd been doing at the Cabin or Hamburg and that. But there's some good stuff then. They were well recorded too.
But the interesting thing is that
Three Cool Cats, I think we did.
Did you? You've still got them in your collection?
I think I picked up a pirate record of it. But I'm not sure because I buy all the pirate records and file them away. Don't play them, you know, keep them.
So they're all in mint condition?
Yeah.
You think he has an American accent?
No, I don't.
No?
Anything but. In fact, I'm quite surprised that the man sounds very Liverpudlian, if I may say so.
Well, you know, I mean, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want?
Yoko, let me ask you. We're John and I getting into reminiscing there. How much does all this mean to you? How much have you learnt through your association with John about the days before you met?
Well, part of it's gibberish, and the other part is fascinating, you know. I've learned a lot, haven't I?
Yeah, I've just about told her everything.
In a decade.
A lot of history. I would like to refresh people's memories as to how you two actually met in the first place.
Oh, it's a long story. Yoko had
Met
come...
with a smash.
Yeah, had come to London, or had been invited to London by some group of artists or something called Destruction in Art Symposium. They had some big thing going on in London. And she had an exhibition put on by that gallery. What was it called?
Indica Gallery.
Indica Gallery, Marion
By
Faithfull's...
John Dunbar.
John Dunbar, Marion Faithfull's ex-husband. I used to go down there occasionally. I'd been down to see things like Takis, who'd made these flashing lights and sold them for a fortune, you know, it'd be garbage. But they sent me this pamphlet, or he called me, I don't know which, about this Japanese girl from New York was going to be in a bag, you know, doing this event or happening. I thought, you know, sex. So I went down, and it was quite funny because I had a chauffeur-driven SS Cooper Mini with black windows. You know, the chauffeur was about 8 foot tall, and the Mini drives up. A giant guy gets out and opens the door, and I go in. And it's the night before the opening.
And I was in the basement.
She was in the basement. There was nobody there. I was thinking,
Just in the basement, not in the bag?
No, she wasn't in the bag. So I go in.
I was just preparing, you know, it was before
Right.
the opening. Or something.
There was, you know, like a few nails on a stand and an apple on a stand, cosmic, and just these strange-looking objects, just looked like found objects that had been painted white with little messages written on them. John Dunbar sort of showing me around. I'm looking, thinking, what? How much is that? You know, £100 for a bag of nails? Are you kidding? How much is the apple? £200?
Fresh apple.
Oh, fresh, thanks
Yeah,
a lot.
right.
£200 for a fresh apple? I thought, this is a con. What the hell is this, you know? I go downstairs, and there's a few sort of... There must have been assistants, but I thought there was a minimal audience lying around on the floor. Anyway, but Dunbar's trying to hustle a bit because he thinks the millionaire Beatles are coming to buy, you know? So he introduces me to this strange-looking Japanese woman. Nothing's happening in the bags. I'm expecting an orgy. In a bag, something's going to be happening in a bag, you know, psychedelic. And it's all quiet. And he introduces me to her. And I said, well, where's the sort of happening, the event? And she gives me a little card. And it just says, breathe on it. So I said, You mean like that? She says, yeah, that's it. So I'm looking for action, and I see this thing called hammer and nailing. It's a board with a chain and a hammer hanging on it and a bunch of nails at the bottom. I said, well, can I hammer a nail in? She says, no. So John Dunbar whisks her away. I said,
Because it was before the opening, I didn't want anybody to touch anything.
Right.
So he takes her in the corner and says, that's a millionaire. Oh, you know who that is? She didn't know who I was.
He didn't explain anything,
Well,
really. He was just sort of trying to hint, with his eyes.
Or whatever. She came over and says, you can hammer one in for 5 shillings. I said, I'll give you an imaginary 5 shillings and hammer an imaginary nail in, all right? And that's when we fell. Da-da-da-da-da.
It was as easy as that, was it?
Well, but it took 18 months, 2 years before we really got together.
Do you remember what sort of frame of mind you were in those days, John? Were you a happy man musically? Were you satisfied with life?
What year was it? 66?
66.
Well, you'd have to tell me what the Beatles had out then, and I'll tell you what mood I was in, because I only remember things by what tracks were out.
It's just that going on record, you'd said at that time, after you'd done, I think I'm right in saying, the film How I Won the War, you've said in the press recently that at that stage you actually genuinely wanted out from the Beatles. The pressure was all too much.
Well, it wasn't so much the pressure, it was the boredom, After the Beatles' last tour, which was 65, I think, was the one where the Ku Klux Klan were burning Beatle records and I was held up as a Satanist or something, then we decided no more touring, that's enough of that. I'm not going to put up with it. And I was dead nervous, so I said yes to Dick Lester, that I would make this movie with him. I went to Almeria, Spain for 6 weeks, because I didn't know what to do. What do you do when you don't tour? There's no life. Because I've been on the road.
And that meant a lot to you, didn't it?
Well, it wasn't that I wanted to tour so much, but I didn't know what to do. What the hell do you do all day, I mean, so I did the movie, which was boring as hell, and 6 weeks there. But I was really too scared to walk away. I was thinking, well, this is like the end, really. There's no more touring. That means there's going to be a blank space in the future at some time or other. That's when I really started considering, what can one do? Considering the life without the Beatles, what would it be? And I spent that 6 weeks thinking about that. What am I going to do? Am I going to be doing Vegas? I call it now, but cabaret. I mean, where do you go? So that's when I started thinking about it, but I could not think what it would be or how I could do it, or I didn't consider forming my own group or anything because it didn't even enter my mind. Just what would I do when it stopped?
But at some stage, you obviously did consider that the two of you would make music together. Did that happen quickly?
Well, yes, as soon as we got into Two Virgins, I was interested.
And this is going back to 1968, of course.
But that just happened. Two Virgins just
Two Virgins happened by accident, but still, once I realized somebody else was as kind of balmy as me, liked the sort of freaky sounds and could equally enjoy non-dance music or non-pop music that was, they call it avant-garde, but whatever it is, things to hear in an earphone.
What was your sort of frame of mind as far as the Beatles still having hits was concerned when you'd already started on what was to be a very different musical relationship?
I wasn't consciously making any decisions. It was all sort of subconscious. And I just made the records with the Beatles like one goes to one's job at 9 in the morning, I mean, Paul or whoever would say it's time to make a record. I'd just go in and make a record, not think too much about it. Always sort of enjoy the session if it was a good session. If we got our rocks off playing, it was fine. If it was a drag, it was a drag. But it was become a job.